Welcome to the God Culture, where we urge you to challenge tradition as 1 Thessalonians 5:21 tells us, "Prove all things, hold fast that which is good." We do not intend to be confrontational, although we will defend our positions in comments, but to compare what the Bible really says versus the traditions of men, which Jesus himself rebuked. Jesus said to the Pharisees, "Full well ye reject the commandment of God, that ye may keep your own tradition." Mark 7:9. Now that we have discovered the location and shape of the Garden of Eden, and put forth our strong theory on Camiguin, said it wrong before, guess the Hebrew word Hibok even fits me sometimes. Embarrassed. Camiguin Island being the actual Mount of the East, which starts in the Garden of Eden at its base and rises through the ceiling of the garden, through the ocean floor, and all the way to the summits of Camiguin. We found some unusual things in history that correspond with the eruptions of Mount Hibok-Hibok or Caterman, where we believe Adam offered the very first sacrifice for forgiveness immediately after his fall from the Garden of Eden. If nothing else, listen and see if this makes sense, and you consider a link as we do. In this video, we will explore these possible connections and attempt to interpret what they might mean. This is our interpretation, and we are still in the land of theory on this portion, though we have no question at all that the Garden of Eden is in fact located in the Philippines. For those who worry about politics or political correctness sensitivities, we're dealing with history here and historical events, so we warn you. This video will likely cross those boundaries as we ignore those constraints society attempts to place on limiting speech anyway, which is what political correctness was truly designed to do according to the communist writings, which made it up in the first place anyway. We are just going to cover the truth as best we can, and all of us are still learning as we should be. This is really fascinating stuff, though, and we could not let it go because it is too much of a coincidence in our opinion. If you do not agree at the end, that is okay. We understand, and we love you anyway. First, we again received amazing input from our viewers who continue to research since the last video, and we want to share some of these findings with you because they are fascinating. After the last video where we unveiled the Hebrew word Hibok, which ends with an exclamation point, Hermie, forgive us if we got that wrong, commented, "In my region, northern Mindanao, we pronounced Hibok-Hibok with an exclamation point." Wow. Thanks, Hermie. Now, this is also very interesting. Jeannie says that as a warning to misbehaving children in Leyte from parents, Ipapatapan kita sa Mount Hibok-Hibok. Sorry if I mispronounced. Ipapatatan means, again, probably said it wrong, put into exile. So when they're not obeyed by their children, parents are threatening to put them in exile on Hibok-Hibok. Does that sound familiar? Was there another child of Yahuwah God who was exiled to Hibok-Hibok for disobeying them? Yes, there was. Adam and Eve. I always wonder, there are so many mountains in the Phils, but why it's always been Mount Hibok-Hibok that's being mentioned every time by these elders. Why, indeed, Jeannie. Very, very interesting. And Giovanni is our eyewitness reporting live from Hibok-Hibok. Well, not really, but still reporting. Been to the top of Hibok-Hibok many times. Small group of people dwell there. Amazing that on the top, earth is mixed with many kinds of seashells. The place is called Matum, black in English. Okay, we can't ignore this. The seashells on top of a mountain that supposedly rose out of the sea and is supposedly to be covered with layers of rock over millions of years. That'd be a lot of rock. Meaning those seashells should not be on the surface, according to the very theory that is always quoted by scientism. And believe me, it's scientism, not science. Wonder how old those seashells are. They don't bother to test those, do they? Because they would actually be too young to prove millions of years, wouldn't they? Especially since seashells decompose, according to the real scientists, gardeners, who report their observation that they in fact decompose in their use basically to fertilize plants, and it's used all the time. They can take a while, which to a gardener is less than a year, but that's not millions of years, is it? Because that theory is not scientific at all. No observation nor experiment has ever confirmed that theory, ever. But we just proved it in a very simple observation from our reporter live on Hibok-Hibok. It's wrong. But what about this place on top of Hibok-Hibok called Matum? We probably said it wrong. In Hebrew, me'on, man, dwelling, habitation. And tum, we covered before, means plural of tam, perfections, as in one of the epithets, jewels, of the objects in the high priest's breastplate as an emblem of complete truth. Wow. The dwelling of the high priest. Which high priest? The original high priest of mankind, Adam. Dude. Okay, we can stop there because that makes this whole series. Wow. Our friend Butler R17, reporting from Israel, always offers a unique Hebrew perspective because he understands the language, probably better than all of us. Regarding Lanzones, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that produces a milky white resin for incense, as well as the dried skin of the fruit, which is also used for incense or mosquito repellent, depending on the country. Lanzones were where the miracle was happening. Lian, or where, means where, or derived from. Miracle in Tagalog is Himala. It is like Lamala. Imagine that. More Hebrew in the language. Lanzones is miracle from above, blessed tree, fruit by God Yahuwah. It really makes sense, the meaning of it. And boy, does it. Thank you so much, Butler R17. And Noime, who is always good for astute observation, says, Lanzones in Mindanao, Misamis Occidental, call this fruit bulahan, meaning blessed. Imagine that. Then there is the Benham rise, which has been right under our noses the whole time. EMT 144,000 observed. Benham rise. Ben is the Hebrew word for son of, and Ham is Ham, or Ham. We're not going there. Hot, warm. Noah's son who inherited the hot territories. So Ben-Ham likely identifies that on the other side of the Pison River, to the right of the land of the Garden of Eden, is in fact Ham's territory. However, we are not entering the debate as to whether current ownership goes to the Philippines or someone else, as we do believe Philippines has the right to claim that land today. By the way, if you are listening, Rosette DeLacroix has a YouTube channel in which she has discussed that some mountains might actually be ancient giant trees. We don't know, but it certainly makes sense. What does the shape of the Benham Rise look like to you? Perhaps a tree stump? Well, maybe. We'll leave that for Rosette, but interesting indeed. We had a few emails from folks that had been hoping Mount Mayon was the Mount of the East. We actually believe this mountain is mentioned in Enoch. Remember, from part 7, we found the Hebrew meaning of Mayon is spring of water. And beyond those valleys in Enoch, Visayas, heading north, I came towards the east. Mayon is in Bicol, to the northeast of those valleys of water, which is what we're talking about. And I saw another mountain on which there were trees, and there flowed out water. And there flowed out from it, as it were, a nectar, whose name is styrax and galbanum, two of the spices used in the temple, in the tabernacle, and used by Adam in his sacrifices, and Enoch in his sacrifices, both in and outside of the Garden of Eden. Check this out. So the mountain is named Spring of Water in Hebrew, and the area is also known for the pili tree, which is a resin similar to styrax and galbanum, as well as other spices, which produce resin for incense as well. Very interesting. We did have someone mention a mountain in southern Luzon also. We believe that actually erupts water as well, which is also very fascinating. We did find a little more on this mountain, Mount Mayon, which was one that stood out for sure. We found a reference in an occult writing that the word Adam derives from the Hebrew word meaning imagination, Mayon. Fascinating. But ultimately, we ruled it out as the Mount of the East, as the proofs were really mounting up for Camiguin. We also believe the Mount of the East is a stand-alone ancient mountain, or what we call today an island, not in Luzon, which also discounted the sacred Mount Banahao. We have reviewed a ton of information on that mountain, and it is significant for sure, but we do not find it to be the Mount of the East. We thought at first that actually Panay was going to be the Mount of the East. However, remember, we reviewed a passage in the Cave of Treasures that Adam and Eve were above the mountains of Eden. We believe those ancient mountains of Eden, again, the garden, not the North Pole, not the land of Eden, are the islands of Visayas, basically. They were all ancient mountains before, because the ocean floor was dry land, except for the rivers of Eden that ran through them before the flood in Adam's days. And They were all overlooking the Garden of Eden, which is why the whole region of Visayas was formerly known as Panay, meaning overlooking. In our research, we came across the largest deposit of deuterium reported, and it was in the Philippines, but then we found supposed articles of it being a hoax, so we didn't use it in the last video. Fox brought it up again, and another viewer confirmed that it appears true, and operations, in fact, were already underway. That could be excellent news, as scientists believe deuterium, or heavy water, which is a renewable energy in just 24 hours, with no pollutants or harmful environmental effects, as the article states, this would set up the Philippines, if true, to be the wealthiest nation on Earth without even considering all of the other resources. Is it not odd that all of these resources have been found in recent times, adding to the historic resources of abundance? Even the discovery of Cebu cinnamon in the 80s, for instance. Is all of this entire series, one large chunk of speculation and maybes? We firmly believe not. Yes, we posit a theory from time to time, and we speculate sometimes, but all in all, we have ties so much fact together that the case would be very hard to disprove, which is why no one has. And just where is deuterium found? In the deepest trenches on Earth, which are found where? You mean the Pisan River? You got it. And speaking of the Pisan River, Irwin points out that is why the national language Tagalog means Taga-Ilog. Riverside residences, riverside people. What's odd about this is that the Philippines has rivers, but they're not significant compared to the ocean. Why not people of the ocean? Because this is a surviving understanding from ancient times, when ancient Havila was, and still is, surrounded by the Pisan River, where there is gold, and the gold of that land is good, and there's bdellium, pearl, and the onyx stone. That's why. And Irwin is right. And the funny thing is, those resources of deuterium, the deposits we just mentioned in the last slide, are found in that very river, where the hydrothermal vents still operate in the bottom of the ocean floor, only in the river from Eden and its extending tributaries throughout the earth. Isn't it funny? And Mark Antony comments on the Queen of Sheba. We know he's supposed to be with Cleopatra, right? Not the Queen of Sheba, but who knows? Anyway, I just want to say that when we were excavating, former anthropology student, in northern part of Cebu, Philippines, 5 years ago in the town of San Remigio, the locals had a story about a queen with ships who frequently dock in their area and who had lots of gold and other stuff. And just who could that be? Well, it's the Queen of Sheba, Cebu, of course. And we would like to thank all of our viewers for your comments and your prayers. In 7 months, The God Culture YouTube channel has surpassed the 1 million view milestone, and we are just warming up. Now, let's find out what happened with the eruptions of Hibok-Hibok, the Mount of the East. We begin with the major eruption period, Hibok-Hibok was awoken from its inactive, dormant state, and we'll prove that, prior to this, but September 1st, 1948, continually through 1953. Hibok-Hibok blew its top for this time for real. We want to be clear that our hearts go out to anyone who lost family in these catastrophes, and eventually 500 people sadly lost their lives. This is a very serious issue. However, we are covering the timing and whether there seems to be a connection here. Let's start with the most obvious from 1948. On May 14, 1948, 5 months before, admittedly, David Ben-Gurion, the head of the Jewish Agency, proclaimed the establishment of the State of Israel. U.S. President Harry S. Truman recognized the new nation on the very same day. Do you know who owns modern Israel? I mean, we're not going to get into that too much in this video. That's not what this is about. But it's not what we've been told. The Rothschilds. Ownership was transferred to them in the Balfour Declaration of 1817 toward the end of World War I, which gave possession to the Rothschilds for their bringing the U.S. into World War I. We're not going to get into how that happened and how they have that kind of power. You can research that for yourself. Go look it up if you have not. We have to deal with this some, though, in this video, but we are trying not to get drawn into polarizing issues, which have been planted like landmines. As much as they would like to think themselves as gods and the actual bloodline of Jesus, yes, the Da Vinci Code is about them, the Rothschilds, in their own words, and that proof is all out there. They have no right to that land. The Rothschilds are not Hebrews, and Yahushua, Jesus, had no offspring. They are, and we'll prove this in time, but not this video, the synagogue of Satan, who say they are Hebrews and are not, but do lie. Revelation 2:9 and 3:9. Those are Yahushua, Jesus' words exactly. Why would we go there? Well, it's unavoidable with this topic, because it leads there. As we explained before, the tribes of Israel have not regathered yet, as there has been no presence of Ephraim and Manasseh in Israel, and they had the birthright passed to them, not Reuben, the oldest son, who lost his birthright, nor was it ever passed to Judah. They were never given the birthright. They were given the scepter, and that was passed to Judah, but then to Yahushua, Jesus, who still has it. Therefore, without Ephraim and Manasseh, Judah has no legitimate claim to that land. And that's principally who is there these days. You can try to split hairs and say, well, maybe somebody in the tribe of Judah might actually have been from the tribe of, this and that. Well, yeah, okay, maybe, but probably not. And certainly are not identifying themselves as such. No proof has ever come forward to prove that claim at all. And it should have been vetted fully by the world community before it ever happened. Now, you may not agree with that, but we will prove that out over time. But this is over 4 months before the eruption of Hibok-Hibok on September 1st, right? How could there be a tie here? Oh, there is. Because the law, the new government of Israel, in just 4 days after they became a nation on May 19th, 1948, they became a nation on the 15th, that was passed, redefined many Palestinians as absentee owners, even those who did not flee their homes. Few ever recovered their property. And this is fact, whether you want to make the argument that they had a right to do so or not, doesn't matter. This happened. So what? Right? This law began enforcement on September 1st, 1948, and continued to grow, as laws always do in a Pharisaic system, until 80% of the Palestinians had actually been displaced from their homes. This is a land grab. You can call it whatever you want. You could try to justify it, but it's a land grab. There's no other way to view it. We are well aware of the arguments about Zionism, but a good number of the Palestinians actually fit the definition of Hebrew better than the Rothschilds do, who own modern Israel, and they are not Hebrews. Again, research that further on your own. We will prove it out later. It takes an entire video, but we will. So, Israel became a nation on the exact date of the eruption. They began enforcing a law that leads to the confiscation of property of the residents who live there. Forget all the Zionist propaganda for a second, as well as that of the Palestinians, for that matter. We don't care about polarizing arguments. We're not entering that. Just look at the issue. Does any government, I don't care who they are, have the right to take your home because new bosses just moved in? Is that ever a right thing? This isn't the biblical times where Joshua was literally fighting tribes of Nephilim giants who Yahuwah God ordered dead, exterminated from that land. No, it wasn't genocide, as some try to paint. And no, God's not this evil God wiping out people with the flood. He wasn't wiping out people. He was wiping out hybrids, manipulated humans. And this was the same that lived in the land of Canaan in that day. You can research every tribe, and every tribe leads to giants. And we'll prove that in our flood series further. We will get back to that eventually. Many of these so-called Palestinians are the peasant farmers who did not leave their land when Israel was torn apart before, and their families were citizens of Israel before it was disbanded by the Romans. And some are even Hebrews of mixed origin. And some are even Hebrews of direct origin. No matter how you spin it, this comes up on the wrong side. Yahuwah God did not give these directions to modern Israel. There is no biblical standard for that. And you can't look to Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and find that there. You cannot, because it's not. And what's the deal with September 1st? It does appear to be a very significant date in which Jewish events, especially, have occurred. Not necessarily within their control at all times, but in more modern times. Here are a few. So we're going to quickly rattle off some dates and events here, all happening on September 1st specifically. In 1267, Rabbi Moses ben Nachman establishes a Jewish community in Jerusalem. 1614, Vincent Fetmich expels Jews from Frankfurt on Main in Germany. In 1739, 35 Jews were sentenced to life in prison in Lisbon, Portugal. The reason? Treason. In 1799, Bank of Manhattan Company opens in New York City. It's the forerunner to Chase Manhattan, which the Rockefellers, who are also the ones who funded the museum in Israel, as well as they are, in fact, Jews, that slowed down the Dead Sea Scrolls from being released and sold some into private collections out of public view, who was initially still funded by the Rothschilds. In 1836, reconstruction begins of the synagogue of Rabbi Judah Hasid in Jerusalem. 1859, first Pullman sleeping car in service. Pullman was an Ashkenazi Jew. 1859, R.C. Carrington and R. Hodgson, also Ashkenazi Jews, make the first observation of solar flares. And in 1859, the first solar storm affected the electrical telegraph service. Perhaps. Actually, that can be proven that maybe it didn't actually happen. We're not going to get into that in this video because we don't have that kind of time. 1870, Napoleon III captured at Sedan, also an Ashkenazi Jew. 1878, first female telephone operator starts work. Emma Nutt in Boston, an Ashkenazi Jew. I know Jews didn't get to choose when they were expelled from countries or sentenced, as you'll see later, by Hitler, who also happened to be an Ashkenazi Jew, and so was much of his leadership, as well as Stalin, and his leadership, as well as Franklin Roosevelt, or shall I say Rosenfeld, his family name before it was changed, for that matter, and so are most judges, especially in Europe and America. We have found that dates matter to the Kabbalist. It's not about Jews, even Ashkenazi Jews. It's about Kabbalists. This is a sect of Judaism, and they aren't really Jews. They aren't really serving that religion, nor are they serving Yahuwah God in any way. They are the opposite. But they are the ones who run the show. And that is well proven by many out there. And we'll get to that eventually, but we're not trying to get into things that are called conspiracy theory. They pick their dates based on their religion, Kabbalah. We're about to get to something even more significant, but we're going to rattle off some more dates here. 1901, construction begins on the New York Stock Exchange, mostly Ashkenazi Jewish trade, but Kabbalist specifically. 1913, George Bernard Shaw, an outspoken communist Jew Kabbalist, premieres in London. 1913, the Second Chinese Revolution begins on September 1st. These are all September 1st. Is that a coincidence? And is there a tie? We'll show you there is. 1930, the disappearance of Supreme Court Justice Joseph Crater. That's another one that, in fact, is tied to Judaism. Again, Kabbalah, not regular Judaism. 1938, Benito Mussolini cancels civil rights of Italian Jews. 1939, Hitler orders extermination of the mentally ill. Hitler was an Ashkenazi Jew, a Kabbalist, occultist, for sure. 1939, World War II starts as Germany invades Poland by attacking Danzig. 1941, Jews living in Germany are required to wear a yellow Star of David. 1942, obviously that date meant a lot to Hitler, didn't it? 1942, U.S. federal judge upholds detention of Japanese Americans, again tied to World War II, where you have the Ashkenazi Jew, Hitler, Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill, all tied to Kabbalah. You don't have to believe those things. We're going to get to the point here in just a minute, and you're going to see it is huge. 1942 also, German troops land on Taman Peninsula. Why did we throw in a reference to the Second Chinese Revolution here? Because communism is a product of Kabbalah. Read Kabbalist Helen Blavatsky's writings, as well as Karl Marx, real name Moses Mordecai Levy. you will find the trail also leads right back to the Rothschilds. In fact, the firm that funded the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia was called Kuhn, Loeb and Company. It is a Wall Street bank run by Jacob Schiff. Schiff married into the Rothschild family. So he was a U.S. banker funding Russia. The Rothschilds. You mean the Cold War? Exactly. It was all a ruse to make money on war and bring about a one world system, which the Bible describes the beast rising from. So, the U.S. is linked to Russia, as the revolution was led by Kabbalist Jews from Brooklyn, New York. Not just the guy who funded it, not just Stalin, who also came from Brooklyn. Wow! But also most of the leadership that he used in the revolution, even prior to Stalin, in fact, were all tied to Kabbalah, and they were Jews from Brooklyn, New York. Again, they're not into Judaism. They're following something different. Jews are not the issue here, and we're not talking about Jews. This isn't about racism and race. This is about a religion within called Kabbalah, which we'll prove in a future video is absolutely 100% the doctrine, the very doctrine of the watcher, fallen angels before the flood. That's what we're talking about here, not Jews. So don't call us racist, because we are not. We're just throwing political correctness to the side here, because this is all tied to a religion called Kabbalah, the religion of the watchers. One more slide and we're going to get to the point here. 1943, Chiang Kai-shek again becomes chairman of the Nationalist Government of China, funded by Roosevelt. Go look it up. He even funded their Air Force according to the China Mirage, a wonderful book that I encourage everyone to read because it lays out that era very, very well. And it's not from a conspiracy theorist. It's from the son of the editor of the New York Times. He is not a right-wing conspiracist or any of those things, and he's just covering history, and he does it very well. He doesn't reach all the conclusions we do, but he covers it very well. It's worth a watch. 1945, VJ Day, formal surrender of Japan aboard the USS Missouri marks the end of World War II. U.S. date, the Japan date, September 2nd. U.S. used September 1st. Why? Well, because it matches their religion. 1946, Greece votes for monarchy. 1950, 13 North Korean divisions open assault on UN lines. The beginning of the Korean War. 1951, Prime Minister Ben-Gurion in Israel establishes the Israeli Secret Service Mossad, and there are many reports out there on what Mossad has done. It has not been a good thing. 1955, 2 Egyptian fighters were shot down over Israel. Why September 1st? A significant date indeed. But here's the largest occurrence. On the exact day of that eruption of the Mount of the East. Is it just a coincidence? See what you think. Communist form, North China People's Republic, September 1st, 1948, the exact day of the eruption. What does that mean? This is the official institution of communism that would lead to the largest extermination of human beings mankind has ever known. Estimates are that 60 to 80 million and more were murdered by Mao's government directly and indirectly in less than 10 years. That's one country, and it had more casualties than World War II, but its own citizens. Who were they wiping out? Well, likely areas where Joktan's relatives lived. How could that be? Remember the videos we produced for September 23rd, which we are now expanding into a series, and that will be coming out soon. It'll take us a little while still, but we will get there. If the Philippines is the woman, in dual symbolism, we never said that it wasn't taking place in heaven at first. It was. That didn't take place perhaps even in the sky. Perhaps. We're talking about dual symbolism, that the Philippines represents the woman back down on earth, where the whole scenario plays out, and the red dragon pursues the woman there. Then John, in his vision, is standing on the sandy shores of that land that protects the woman. Perhaps the Philippines. We believe so. We still believe that. We haven't changed any of our thinking there. We're just pursuing, developing it further, and proving it out. And you'll see that soon. And he sees the beast rise out of the sea. Which sea? Well, it doesn't say, but what sea is right before the Philippines, which has a significant country next to it that fits the representation in dual symbolism here? Well, the South China Sea. And who is the enemy who pursues the woman? The great red dragon, right? Now, that's Satan. Yes, that's Satan. We're not disputing that. We're not saying there's a new interpretation. That we're saying there's dual symbolism here, that it's also identifying the nations involved. If the Philippines is the woman, then the great red dragon in terms of countries would be obvious, because China has been known as the red dragon since ancient times, and it is the largest country in the world. Thus, great. That fits as well. Great red dragon. We are working on that series, and we will go into further detail, so don't hit us with anything there, because we're going to prove that out completely. Give us time. But Hibok-Hibok did not stop with that eruption. But is that not significant? Could that not be a direct tie? We believe so. In May 1949, remember, we are in theory land here. This whole video is theory. But this is very coincidental if it's not the case. In May 1949, a large explosion from the summit crater of Hibok-Hibok volcano preceded by a week of intense earthquakes. The explosion created a cauliflower-shaped eruption plume and produced devastating pyroclastic flows and layers down the northeast side of the volcano. 8 square kilometers land were invaded and destroyed. In May 1949, a new lava dome started to grow in the crater. So, in May 1949, the world saw 1. The statue of the Council of Europe was drawn up. That's the forerunner to the EU. It's not the EU, but it's the forerunner to it. U.S. President Harry Truman signs a bill establishing a rocket test range at Cape Canaveral in Florida. This leads ultimately to the establishment of NASA. The Chinese Red Army occupies Shanghai. This further advances Mao's communism, and this is really the final straw leading to his takeover of the entire country. Do you see the pattern? Significant happenings with the advancement of the one world beast system. That's what this is about. This isn't about China. This isn't about Russia. This isn't about Jews. This isn't about the U.S. This isn't about any of those things, because those are all shell governments that do the bidding of the Rothschilds, the beast system that is really running the show behind the scenes, which is why you see a president come and make promises. You know, you had Clinton. Then you had Bush, and Bush promised everything in the opposite direction, yet what did he do? The same things. Then Obama came and he swung the pendulum back to the other direction. He was going to change everything and do it differently, and what did you see? The same things. Now you see Trump, and he swings the pendulum back to the other side. I mean, we're just watching the pendulum, boom, 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 back and forth and back and forth. That's all we're seeing. But you have to see beyond the puppet show and look to the puppet masters, because what they want to happen ultimately happens every time. That's the common bond to all of these. It's not about any country, any individual, any race, none of that. Throw all that out. That's all political correctness, doublespeak, which is all contrived to specifically limit our speech so we can't even talk about these issues. Why can't we talk about these issues? Why is it taboo? It should not be. We should be allowed to explore this, yet we're not. It's conspiracy theory. Oh, now we're supposed to completely shut down, and that's what it does. And that's what it's intended to do. So, how about the next eruption? December 4th, 1951, superheated gases rolled down Mount Caterman, Philippines. See, they called it Caterman internationally, not Hibok-Hibok. The new lava dome continued to grow during the next 2 years and become a prominent feature by late 1951. On the 4th of December 1951, pyroclastic flows went down the northeast flank of the mountain and reached the outskirts of Mambajaw, town where 500 people were killed. And that is sad. Even sadder is the state of the world as all of these things are happening, and it has only gotten worse. Evil is now called good, and good evil. So what happened on this day? We don't have a specific occurrence that only happened on this day, but here's what was happening. From June 1950 all the way through 1953 was the Korean War. After World War II, Korea was divided into two countries after being unified for thousands of years. A stupid move. Not just unlearned or many of the other nice words you could use. No, this was stupid if you were trying to avert war and not cause it. And dividing it between half communist Russia control, which we know are just Americans, by the way, that took over Russia to create an antithesis. Research the Hegelian dialectic if you have not. And the other half was capitalist. What did they think was going to happen? They knew exactly, because they were planting more reasons for war, just as they did in the Middle East with Israel dividing the Ottoman Empire in the first place. But what they did in Israel, seizing land, assured war and turmoil. It's done on purpose. They didn't have to seize that land. They had land. And they did the same in Vietnam, which also was an ancient society for thousands of years. They were not split, and now all of a sudden they're divided. And not just divided, but divided between the thesis and the antithesis. We recommend a well-written book, as we said before, which details this Asian history during this period, called The China Mirage. Many times they call this the Forgotten War, the Korean War. But in terms of superpowers, this was absolutely a world war, and most especially a major advancement in creating the one world beast system of revelation, which is what this really is all about. And no, this should never be forgotten. What about other eruptions before 1948, though? Wikipedia says Hibok-Hibok erupted 1871 to 75, 1862, and 1827. So we researched this further to confirm when it erupted and when it didn't. This from the Assistant Director of the Philippines Weather Bureau in 1904. So he was the most qualified expert, not Wikipedia, and he was close to the period, meaning it was all fresh on people's minds at that point. So he's going to give the most accurate perspective. It is also reported that at Caterman, Mambajao, and other towns, confused rumbling sounds and detonations were at times heard, which were usually referred to some of the neighboring volcanoes of Mindanao. So it was other volcanoes, not these. Thus, all reports of this volcano, Caterman Hibok-Hibok, previous to the year 1871 are vague and uncertain, though there can be no doubt that in the past ages, ancient times, perhaps, if that part's even true. They always assume all volcanoes erupted in past ages. They can't prove that in most cases. It must have been one of the most active and powerful volcanoes in the archipelago. Yeah, maybe. We don't necessarily buy that, but that's okay. So let's take 1862 and 1829, which were before 1871, and the expert says they didn't erupt. Those were volcanoes over in Mindanao that shook the island. Okay, so we'll take them off because they were not eruptions associated with the mountains of Camiguin. So let's look at 1871. On April 30th, 1871, Hibok-Hibok erupted for 7 days and died down. So it was not severe like 1948 through 1953, but this is significant because this is the moment that the mountain woke up from its slumber. We know he speculated it erupted in ancient times, as they always do with volcanoes, kind of like Yellowstone, which is a supervolcano that erupted other times, but they don't actually have any proof of that whatsoever. Now, March 18th through May 28th, during this period of the eruption, the very first communist proletariat dictatorship was formed, called the Paris Commune in France. It was a radical socialist and revolutionary government that ruled Paris during that time. Following the defeat of Emperor Napoleon III, which we mentioned before happened on September 1st, imagine that, and the French Second Empire swiftly collapsed at that point. They came in, filled the vacuum, and the communists took over France during that period, the very first communist proletariat. So, here's communism advancing. The beast system advancing. The form of government designed by Moses Mordecai Levy himself. Who's that? Oh, you haven't heard that name. That's Karl Marx. That's his real name before he changed his name. Now, what's next? Because that's not it. 1870 to 1871 was the Franco-Prussian War. What was that? Well, it's easy. It set up the same powers. It set up World War I. It's the precursor. It's the beginning of World War I. The same players in this war will be the same in World War I. Yes, others are added. Others join sides. But still, it doesn't change the fact that is the case. Just 40 years before, really, World War I already began. Now, 1872-73 was the Modoc War, Native American Modoc people versus the U.S. This is small, but still significant because it is advancing. It's wiping out natives who very well may identify as lost tribes of Israel. We don't know that, but they could. We don't know that it's not. 1873 to 1879, the Panic of 1873. This triggered the Depression in Europe and North America. A stock market crash is an economic takeover and advancement of one world government. It is the fuel for these wars and governments and takeovers. It is a transfer of wealth from regular people to the elite Rothschilds and friends. This crash led, ultimately, the repeat of it, to the Great Depression, as well if you track the tactics especially. But what about on the religious side? We get a lot of email questions about this. So we're going to deal with it in this video, since we're dealing with other hot buttons, perhaps. If they are not in the Bible, and they are not, just where did the Mary doctrine and the doctrine of infallibility of the Pope originate? Calm down, Catholics. We are just offering the truth here. If you don't want to hear it, skip this next one slide, because we only deal with this in one slide and then we move on. We don't mention it again. But this information is fascinating. It just so happens to come from the same era leading up to the 1871 through 75 eruptions. It's not 1871, let's be clear, and we'll show you the dates. The presiding pope of that era, and king was his title, was Pope Pius IX. It was he who ordered the proclaimed Immaculate Conception of the Blessed Virgin as dogma of the Church, which means it did not come from Peter. Then he did the unthinkable against Romans 3:23, which says, "For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of Yahuwah God." He declares the office of Pope as infallible. In other words, they can't make a mistake, and makes it doctrine of the Church. The decree reads that it is divinely revealed that the Pope, when he speaks ex cathedra, is possessed of infallibility in defining doctrines of faith and morals. In other words, he can't be wrong. And that it is, such definitions are irrevocable. So this means forever. This doctrine can never be taken away by another pope, even if it's wrong, and it is. Seems to us the invoking of this already proved that that pope was very flawed. There is no scripture to support this kind of doctrine, neither the Mary doctrine. Sorry, but that's fact. You will not be able to produce one because it's not there. And it gives just one man far too much power. We see it all the time in government, whether it be secular government or within the church government. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. There were two other minor eruptions as well, and we'll deal with those. June 1897 to March 1898, Hibok-Hibok erupted again. Again, minor in comparison to 1948, but nevertheless, here are some events that coincided. June 12th, possibly the most severe quake in history, strikes Assam, India. Imagine that. Shockwaves were felt over an area the size of Europe. Could that be connected? We believe it very well could be. June 16th, a treaty annexing the Republic of Hawaii to the United States is signed. Now, this was a takeover of Hawaii that the natives did not want. If you read history, you'll see that is the case. The Jesuit missionaries came into Hawaii. They took over land. One of them was named Dole, as in Dole pineapple and vegetables, cannery all over the world, one of the largest and very, very wealthy. Dole was a Jesuit missionary, not a businessman, supposedly. Yet, he did pretty well for himself, didn't he? He seized that land. His people then staged a coup where they even involved the Marines of the U.S. military to pin down the Queen and make her sign over her authority, and they took over the government. So there's a lot to that story, but you can research that on your own. It's all out there, and it's well documented. August 1896 to August 1898. The Philippines Revolution against Spain. Whoa. And then April to August 1898, a very short war for two superpowers. Maybe that's because, well, Spain wasn't a superpower anymore, so it really wasn't even a war per se. Although it played out in the land of the Garden of Eden as well. So, what was all that? Again, the New Atlantis United States, that's from Sir Francis Bacon. That's what he called it, and he was the head of Freemasonry in his day, and this is when the U.S. was first founded. Begins spreading its phoenix wings. Now, Ben Franklin recorded the original bird was the phoenix, not the eagle, but they felt better to call it an eagle. That's all well documented. Look into the Lusitania, which is the ship that turns out was a false flag used to justify that war. Because it sat in the harbor in Cuba, it was unannounced to the Spanish, which was rather surprising. And when it was blown up from the inside, according to historical documents, there was a witness in the harbor, according to the New York Times, named Rothschild. Imagine that. That was a false flag. Look into that. We're not going to deal with that. Again, not for this video, but there is tons of documentation out there. Let's move on to the next one. Then there's July 26, 1902. Again, another minor eruption, according to the meteorologist. February 4th, 1899 through July 4th, 1902 was the Philippine-American War, and actually fighting continued until 1913 for another 11 years beyond that. So after the war ended, though, the U.S. proceeded to treat the Philippines, the land of the Garden of Eden, as a territory, as if it could ever actually own it. Now, on July 12th, Arthur Balfour, remember that name from before, succeeds Lord Salisbury, who retired as British Prime Minister on July 11th. So, in that same period, arises Balfour. Who was he? The Balfour Declaration of 1917. And what was that? That is the document that gave the ownership of Palestine, the land of Palestine, to the Rothschilds. Not to Israel, not to the Hebrews, but to the Synagogue of Satan. And again, we'll prove that further in another video. So the one world government advances. And that is the common thread. And that, my friends, is the last eruption. So, all the eruptions of Hibok-Hibok ever recorded in the annals of history, it woke up in 1871 during the establishment of the first communist proletariat dictatorship in France. The Franco-Prussian War, which is the precursor to two world wars, really. And the Panic of 1873, which was an economic takeover of Europe and the U.S. In 1897 and 98, we had the Philippines Revolution during those eruptions against the Spanish, the Holy Roman Empire, which broke out and then led to the Spanish-American War. Then in 1902, it erupts again at the end of the Philippine-American War, and just after Balfour becomes Prime Minister of England, the guy who will declare Palestine in the hands of the one world government, Rothschilds. Think about that. On September 1st, 1948, the largest eruption, or larger, there was one larger after that, but during that period, were the largest eruptions. And on that exact day that Israel enforces Palestinians out of their homes in mass, on that exact day, also, communists form the North China People's Republic, Mao's organization, which would take over China during this period of eruptions and kill more people than any government, than any war in all of history. We proved out several significant events tying to September 1st as an historical important date, like the start of World War II, the UN opening in New York, Mussolini and Hitler canceling rights of Jews, or making them wear a yellow star, which is the same thing. Construction began of the New York Stock Exchange. Chase Manhattan is formed. The solar superstorm, did it actually happen, one must wonder? We won't go there this video. Check it out. Japan surrenders in World War II. The Korean War begins. Israel's Mossad was formed. And Egyptian fighters were shot down, etc. Then, in May 1949, the forerunner of the EU is formed. The beginnings of NASA, and Mao takes Shanghai for the first time, leading to the rest of China shortly after. But these are all coincidences. Don't read into and connect any of this, because things in history just occur in a vacuum. They're never connected, never. That is how they teach us, isn't it? No, history is very connected, and we must see it so we are not deceived. To think that China and Russia, which were founded startups funded by the Rothschilds and their agents, are no longer under Rothschild control is just ignorant. We must open our eyes and see what the Bible is telling us. And when we look at history, we see Revelation unfolding right in front of our eyes. And the Mount of the East has spoken. And in its speaking, it is highlighting these events of major advancement of the beast system historically. Imagine that. The good news is we are in the days of increasing knowledge, and we can see. Thank you for watching our Solomon's Gold series. Please share this video with others and subscribe to our YouTube channel and view our website at thegodculture.com. If you subscribe and you are not getting notified by YouTube, as it seems most do, but have heard from a few who are not, please email us at thegodculture@gmail.com and we will notify you ourselves. Also remember to prove all things for yourself. Yahuwah, God bless.
you.